Just a quick question before I get started. How many people work on the editorial side of journalism? How many folks are on the business side? None. Okay, this will be one, two. How many about both? And then we have students, I'm guessing, as well? Okay. So I began thinking, how did I end up presenting a conversation about marketing to a bunch of journalists when I myself started off in journalism? And so I thought to myself, how did I get to this point? What led me here? And I think it was really a passion for data and a passion for understanding things. And the ability to impact businesses seemed to be much more viable on the marketing side than it did on the journalism side. Which I think is an interesting conundrum, because I think that, when we talk about telling stories and storytelling, data is a really powerful tool for us to be able to do that. So just to kind of give you some quick background about where I'm from, I work for an agency in Cincinnati, Ohio. We have about 175 employees. My title is Director of Insights and Innovation. And so what my job is to do is to basically take all of this data that all these companies are generating, all of our media buying and planning is generating, and basically turn that into insight and then help companies innovate on those insights and work out new business streams, try new things, and see where it takes us. And one of the things that I work on a lot as part of this agency is what we refer to as content marketing. And so basically what that is marketers stealing from journalists. There's no other way to describe it. What we essentially have done is created a way to market to our audiences by using techniques that journalists use in terms of their storytelling, in terms of creating valuable media, in terms of creating things that people want to read. And so what I'm going to kind of suggest here is that you steal from us. And so the things that I'm going to talk about this morning are concepts that we apply from a marketing standpoint to our content marketing initiatives that I really think if you're not doing today, you should at least try to explore some of this, or hopefully give you some things to think about so that you can kind of take some of the applications that we're doing with content marketing and apply it to your businesses as well. So how are we managing change? I think, we've all talked about change. You don't need to hear that story. We can talk about fragmentation. We can talk about digital. We can talk about all that. But in Empower Media Marketing, what we've essentially done is we've broken that into concepts around paid, owned, and earned media. And so a lot of what marketing and media buying and planning from an Empower Media Marketing standpoint has been about paid media, just making paid media placements with publishers like yourselves and the publications that you work on. We have another company called Powerhouse Factories, which basically does what we refer to as earned media. So they help companies manage their social media profiles, help manage their social presences online. And then this middle one is Magnetic Content Studios. And what we're doing here is we're talking about owned media. We're talking about brands as publishers. We're talking about how brands are essentially taking the publishing model from journalism and applying it to their brands and creating relevant content. And so obviously, the challenge is very similar on the media buying and planning side than it is on the journalism side. This used to be the way it worked. We had 3 networks, a local paper, maybe a local radio station, and where we put our media and how we chose to invest our clients' dollars in that media landscape was very, very easy. Now, it's been replaced with this. We have proliferation of devices, proliferation of mediums, proliferation of all kinds of different things. And we have another challenge, which is in the 17X's, that's how many times people switch screen in an hour when they're engaged with media content. So that means jumping from a phone to a television, back to the phone, maybe to a tablet, maybe to a laptop. And the 27X that's how many times digital natives or millennials switch screens. So I think this is only going to become more complex and more challenging as we figure out ways as marketers to reach our audience. And certainly as journalists, how do you create ways to tell compelling stories? That's one of the things that we're doing in content marketing and some of the things that we're experimenting with. So just to kind of give you an example of how crowded it is, this is the Apple newsstand. There are 10,490 apps in the Apple newsstand. So the idea of just being able to get your story or get your publication in front of your audience, you have to market it. And you have to think about ways to be relevant and get this in front of people. So from a marketing standpoint, we see this as a huge opportunity for scale for our clients. And so essentially, what this is telling us is that people love to engage with content. And there's a stat where it's essentially 43% of people that engage in content spend 21 hours or more a week with content. And so content is in demand. Even more so, we've learned as marketers that 73% of people would rather learn about a company through an article than an advertisement. And so what have we done to attract these new audiences? What are we doing to help our brands be relevant in this space? Content marketing. And this isn't, and I'm going to kind of explain this because I think from a journalistic perspective, there's definitely apprehension around the commingling of advertising and editorial content. That is not what I'm talking about. I'm not talking about native advertising. I'm not talking about advertorial. What I'm talking about are brands that are specifically creating content that may or may not happen to have their name on it. They're telling stories to an audience. And so essentially Red Bull. Red Bull's an example. Last year, they filmed 200,000 hours of video. And they put it on their Red Bull site, and it's all high adrenaline, high impact, X Games type stuff. You've seen Red Bull. I forget the guy's name that sort of went 20 miles in the air and kind of plunged to the earth. That's essentially what Red Bull's doing. They're not saying brought to you by Red Bull, but the Red Bull, you can't miss it. That's what this brand is about. But there's a lot of interesting and engaging content that, frankly, young audiences love. It has nothing to do with selling you another can of Red Bull. It's just simply, let me give you interesting content, engage with me. I want to reach you at some point with marketing, but I'm not going to sell you right now. I'm going to give you content you want. Liberty Mutual is another one, the Responsibility Project. They basically have developed a website where they talk about ways to do things, to do the right thing. And so it's an educational forum where people can come in and talk about moral and ethical issues and create different scenarios and get input on different scenarios as to what is ethical behavior. For example, here, the Moral Balancing Act, they're talking about just simple morality things, liable for doing a good deed. So they're talking about, as a good Samaritan and you're giving CPR, sometimes, there's an expression, no good deed goes unpunished. If you help someone and give them CPR, there's an article that basically talks about how you have to ask that person for permission to give them CPR before you give them CPR, otherwise you could be held liable for helping them out, which sounds ridiculous, but that's interesting, informative content. It has nothing to do with Liberty Mutual at the outset, but eventually Liberty Mutual is the one that's sponsoring and paying for this stuff. Kettle One Vodka, Gentleman's Read. This is definitely for a younger crowd, where they're talking about different types of things that young men are interested in. It's kind of like Maxim, but again, they're not selling the vodka. They're not telling you, all the great things you can do. There's no drink recipes on this site. I was reading some of it this morning. They were basically talking about the cool skyscrapers in Chicago and what makes them cool. And there might be a mention of a bar at the top that you can kind of see the city or whatever, but they're not selling you vodka. They're just talking about things that they know their audience is interested in. Unlike what content marketing is not. Content marketing is not what Ford is doing, where they plaster it all over American Idol. They have this rider challenge, and they're very overtly telling you that this is brought to you by Ford and the Ford Fiesta. This is not content marketing. This is advertorial. And so I think there's a difference when we're talking about content marketing, that the brand is playing a secondary role in this conversation. And essentially, they're borrowing all of the practices in terms of building websites and finding and identifying engaging content, building out editorial practices, having editorial strategies that are geared towards their audiences. And again, like I said, and I'm repeating myself, brand is secondary. So essentially, what I'm suggesting is maybe spend some time thinking like a marketer. And one of the things that we do is we use data to figure out what's good and what's crap. And I think as journalists, we always use our intuition. We know what the good stories are. We know where they're at. We know where to find them. We know how to go deep with those. And we also know what's not a good story. And a lot of that is intuitive. And it's just inherent in the way we've been trained and the way that we view the world and the way that we approach putting our publications together. And so, one of the things that I'm suggesting from a marketer is think insights and not just story. So make sure that you're using data to inform insights about your audience, about your readership, about how they're engaging with your publications, not just figuring out what should I write about next, or what is it that people are reading and I need to write more of. I think that's a valid approach, but I don't think that's enough. That's insufficient. And so what you want to do is make sure that you understand your audience, that you understand what they want, what they're demanding. And I'm going to get to sort of a case study where we sort of had our eyes blown wide open in a certain situation about who we thought our audience was and who they turned out to be. So I think the first step is put data in the hands of the editors. And I don't know if editors feel like this is something that belongs on the business side. I don't know if the business side feels like, well, if I give it to the editors, they're not going to quite know what to do with it. I think essentially the bottom line here is get feedback. That's all this is. This isn't about programming content. This isn't necessarily about gaming the system and figuring out what to write. What this is, hey, can I get some feedback on whether or not people thought this was good or people thought this was crap? And so I think if you can kind of take that approach and use the data to inform that process and say, all right, you know what? People are reading this. People are finding this funny. And you know what? This other stuff that we thought might work, it's not working out very well. So again, just putting data in the editor's hands, I think is really important. How many people use data when they're informing their work in this room? I'm just kind of curious. Yeah, every hand should go up, right? And not because we're trying to engineer content, but because all of us could use feedback on what we're doing and what's working and what's not working. So I think that's the first thing. Use data for feedback. The second thing, and if my colleagues from Outbrain are here, they'll really appreciate this slide. Yes, we love Outbrain. It's fantastic. And the main reason we love it is because it's super easy. This doesn't have to be a hard thing. You already have content. Identify a little bit of a budget that you want to spend and basically distribute that content through Outbrain, through their flexible CPC initiative, and your links will start to appear all over the web. And so your content starts to appear, and then suddenly people start engaging with it, and they start coming to your website. Well, guess what? All of that data that process is generating is rich with insight on what's working and what's not working with your content. And so the idea then is to take that and start generating insights from that information so that you sort of know, hey, what's working, what's not, what headlines resonate, which headlines don't resonate, who's reading it, where are they coming from, how can I get more of this? Certainly there's a monetization angle to that. There's no denying it. That's a business strategy, but that's the implications of the data. The data itself doesn't exist for the business. So apply it to both sides of the house. Take it to your editorial teams and talk about what headlines are working. Take it to the business side and say, hey, how can we monetize this new traffic? Can we engage in a game of arbitrage where we can monetize traffic through our own advertising initiatives that's greater than what we're paying in terms of flexible CPC? And I think a lot of publishers have been successful in being able to do that because they can efficiently distribute that content and attract a new audience. So an example, and one that I worked on when I was publisher of a hobbyist magazine called Coin World, it was essentially a magazine for hobbyist enthusiasts associated with coin collecting. And our demographic was basically anyone retired that had a passion for collecting coins. And we used to sit in our meetings and joke, these are the guys that wake up every morning, walk out to the mailbox, grab their newspaper, come in, have a cup of coffee, maybe very meticulously go through our magazine and our pricing guides and figure out what their coin collection is worth and think about it as an investment for their family, and pretty much kept to themselves. What we also believed was that they were not digitally savvy, that they weren't using their computer, they weren't using tablet devices, they just skewing very, very old. And one of the things we always joked about, and was kind of awful but kind of true, was our audience continues to die off and we have no new audience to replace them with, right? And so we're like, well, what do we do about this? So magically, this article, Obama signs 1099 repeal law, which pretty much is just a benign article about changing the requirements for IRS on purchases of $600 or more, performed 10 times greater than every other single piece of content that we had. It received 538 comments. And when we started to go and look at the Outbrain data on what was happening and what was going on, well, first we read the comments and we were a little bit disturbed because it definitely was not necessarily positive commentary on our president. Some of it was very poorly informed, some of it was very poorly written, some of it was offensive. But once we got past that and we really dug into the data, what we began to see was a younger demographic coming from Fox News, a younger demographic coming from CNN and MSNBC and a lot of large news sites. And essentially what was happening was that people were looking to Coin World, which we considered the newspaper of record for the coin collecting industry. And basically, we just reposted a lot of news about what was going on with the US Mint. It wasn't sexy stuff, it was really boring, but people were using our site for research. They were highly active in the Tea Party, they were highly active politically, they were digitally savvy, and they were much younger than we initially thought. And we thought to ourselves, our audience isn't dying off, it's just changing. Now, what did we do with that? The first thing we did is we went back to the editorial team and told them about this and said, we are not touching the editorial. Keep writing what you're writing. But we went to the sales team and said, hey, you know what? We need to rethink our approach to advertising here. And what we need to do is kind of go forward and say, all right, what are the types of advertisers that we can essentially attract that we haven't been attracting in the past? Without being too cynical, we started to realize it was like gold and silver and a lot of the things you see on Fox News. And they were willing to pay big dollars to advertise to our audience. And so we went ahead and sort of changed our entire advertising strategy as a result of this. And the other good news was that we began to see that our audience was younger. So these investments that we were going to make in an app and an iPad type stuff, we decided to actually move forward with those investments. A pricing guide that was digital on an iPad that could search and allow you to figure out the values of your coins. Because what we began to realize was this was an entire audience hedging against doomsday, right? And it's not my place to determine whether or not doomsday is coming or not, but it was certainly it was an opportunity for me to inject some new revenue into this, flagging product. And so if some of you are facing challenges with your publications, if some of you are struggling, this is a great way for you to begin to rethink your audience, begin to rethink who you're talking to and who's reading your content. Because my guess is that you'll be surprised as what you'll find. And then once you do that, I think the second thing is to expand your thinking and start looking in other places for more information. So, and this is an example, this is sort of a framework or an infrastructure that we give our clients to begin to think about this. So one of the first things we do is we begin to look at social. We begin to see, is this stuff being shared or not? When they're talking about it, are they talking about it in a positive or negative light? And so there are a lot of tools. Sysomos, NetBase is one that we've invested in as a company that essentially allows us to understand what people are saying about our content. Again, we're not talking about what they're saying about the brands. We're trying to understand what they're saying about the content and the articles that are getting posted and whether or not they're sharing those articles. The second thing we do is we begin to look at our site data, which I'm sure a lot of you might be doing, and if you're not, please dig deeply and look at it. Because essentially it's going to tell you what people like and what they don't like. It's going to tell you where they're coming from. It's going to tell you what they care about, what they don't care about. And again, it's not necessary to engineer content and game the system, but to take a human approach and understand who these people are and what they're reading and what they want more of, and make sure that you can deliver that. Another thing we do is search trends. So we refer to Google as the search engines of intentions. It's basically the demand machine. If you think of classic supply and demand, Google will tell you what the demand is, and then you meet it with your supply of content. And so we use a lot of search trend data to understand what to publish, what we should be thinking about publishing, how we should commission new content for our clients. And so what we do is we basically say, hey, this is popular. Let's capitalize on it right now. Yeah, that part maybe is a little bit gaming, but we know it's relevant because we know there's demand. And the reality is if you're not providing that supply, someone else is, and someone else is monetizing that reader's page views, and it's not you. So you want to make sure you're doing that as well. And then we just start to evolve into more traditional data sources. So one of the things we use is audience data. So understanding digital habits and practices, understanding how much of the web they're using, what sites are popular, what sites are unpopular. And this can also be leveraged and used to inform, sort of your distribution strategy. So if you identify an audience, or maybe you identify a potential new audience, you can put that audience into a tool like ComScore or Google's Invite Media double-click system. I'm not sure what it's called right now because they keep changing it. But essentially what you're able to do there then is put that information in there, put that demo in there, see what they like, see where they read, and going back to the slide earlier, take that content, distribute it to those locations, and see if you get any traffic, see if you get anything from that. And then there's traditional research, your MRI surveys, your double-based surveys, Forrester research. They're doing a lot of the work in terms of helping people keep up with this changing environment. And so as you're continuing to piece together this profile of who your audience is, you can certainly look at what they're telling you about how their behaviors are changing. And then with our clients, we use custom data. We use CRM data, email data, and some other things to just kind of round out that picture. And again, this is all about the audience. This has nothing to do with the story. Yeah, there's an editorial process around it, but what we're doing is identifying the best audiences for this content and then making sure that we're able to monetize those with advertising dollars. Sorry, my mouth's getting a little dry. So here's another example of where we use search data. Now this is a retail example, but I think it's a way, to me it's less about who this is and more about the approach. And so if somebody types in shoes, fashion, and style, there's basically 20 million monthly searches. And essentially, they're all geared towards shoes, fashion, and style. But we also know that there's this long tail of actually 400,000 different terms associated with shoes. We were really interested in determining what that had to say, because this retailer, I think it's St. Louis-based Famous Footwear, what they really were struggling with is they can't win on that conversation around shoes, fashion, and style. It's not interesting to them. They're a value-based store. This is the mom coming in and buying shoes for their kids as they're going back to school. She could care less about fashion and style, but yet if you think of shoes, that's what was dominating the conversation. And so what we did is we mined those 400,000 phrases. And the word that jumped out for us, even though there's cheap, comfortable, was this word for. And so this for meant people were buying shoes for a purpose, a utility. I need shoes for a wedding. I need shoes for my kid to go back to school. I need shoes for running. I need shoes for all of these different sort of applications in my life. And it had nothing to do with what was cool, what was sexy, what was fashionable. I just needed shoes that worked. And so what we're able to do is go back to them and say, hey, you have this blog, My Famous Style. The idea of talking about style isn't going to work. What we want to talk about is utility. We want to talk about functional use of shoes and how you as a retailer can apply that in a very practical way for your target. And so what we did then was sort of worked with them on some Facebook stuff and some blog stuff to basically rethink their entire platform around how to be helpful and how to help people find good, cheap, inexpensive shoes for a wedding. Obviously, they still needed to look good, but the idea was that we weren't leading with style. We were going to lead with practical use and application. So I think this is an idea that if you just look at the data and try to look at the data a little bit differently, there's opportunities for everyone to sort of find new things that they could be going after. And one of the great things about digital is it's so cheap. So you're able to kind of do this pretty easily. It doesn't take a huge investment. You don't need a huge program, a huge project. You can just try a few things out here or there and see what works and what doesn't. So I know this one's probably a controversial proposal, but sort of integrate marketing skills into the newsroom. Make sure you're having conversations with these folks. Don't let them drive what you're doing from an editorial perspective, but absolutely be talking to these folks because they have a different point of view. Again, like I said earlier, I started off as a journalist. I think when I was in college, my wife was in the business school, and I always referred to them as blood-sucking business majors. And they were going to suck all the life out of everything, and everything was just going to be business, 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 business. And that just didn't sound like fun. Journalism was way more fun. What I suddenly began to learn, though, as I was doing journalism, was that I really liked data, and that marketing was actually kind of fun, too. And so that's how I ended up in this space. And a lot of my career, I found, has been sort of living between those two worlds. And sort of going into the newsroom and understanding what those needs are, and then kind of coming to the business side of the organization and trying to understand what it is they're trying to accomplish and how those two can sort of mutually facilitate each other's outcomes, because basically you don't have a publication if no one's reading it. And so what we've started to do is we're hiring photographers, we're hiring designers, we're hiring editors. Those people that are getting laid off in some of these crunches, they're coming to work for us. And we're putting them to work because these brands have money and they're willing to engage with an audience. And so we're able to put together editorial plans. We're able to design great, amazing sites. We're able to commission photographers to go out and take great pictures and really do a lot of exciting work that is being subsidized by the brand. And then on the flip side of that, you guys should start employing researchers and product managers and data scientists and find ways to get these people who have been an integral part of the marketing team for so long, find ways to get them into the newsroom. And so, for example, this is a researcher, this is a data pool. You can never know enough about your audience. You can never know enough about who you're talking to. And I know I've said this over and over and over again, and I'm being very redundant, but marketers ruthlessly manage their understanding of who's buying their stuff and what they care about. It is probably their number one priority. You should be as ruthless about understanding who's reading your work and what they care about and what they need. And researchers are a great way to tell you that. I have a colleague of mine, he worked for Gannett for 20 years, and I kind of ran this presentation by him, and he made a point to ask me to stop at this point and make sure that if every single one of you has a researcher somewhere in your organization, to go talk to that person. Because he said there's too many times he was sitting in a corner, he had all this great insight on what was going on with these publications, and he couldn't get audience with the people that could make a difference, that could help reshape where the publication was going. So if that's one thing you can do Kirby Thornton a favor and go talk to him, whoever that is in your organization. The second thing is data scientists, and yeah, I'm trolling a little bit. I put up the Cincinnati Reds, even though I'm a Cleveland Indians fan. But this is really, really interesting. And the problem is I couldn't read it because it's a poster, but look at all the stories in here. Look at everything that's in here that could be talked about. There's probably 100 stories on that chart. And if you have somebody that can go get the data, can pull it together in a meaningful way, and collaborate with that person to start telling stories, and I know we're getting better with data journalism and a lot of things like that, but make sure that you're engaging in this way. If anything, you could probably, if I'm sitting down, I could look at this and I could write a blog about the Cincinnati Reds for the next 3 years on whatever's on this chart. And I'd have content every single day. I would know exactly what I could write. So make sure that you're going and getting this data and you're looking at the totality of it. We were talking about how it's just proliferating. It's everywhere. You can't get away from it. Well, let's use it to our advantage. Let's take advantage of that and dig into it. And the third one is product management. This is what I've basically spent my career doing. And what it is a set of skills that help take things to market and balance all of the different multidisciplinary functions in an organization and really try to help make something cohesive so that everyone's on the same page. It's not easy. But you have a market focus. You have how are you going to connect with that market? You have your business models. You have your planning, your programs, your readiness and support. This is how you take a technology product to market. Well, if you have websites and apps, some of these things can be adjusted and you stick in editorial planning. But the idea here is that really you need to have sets of skills that are engaging with the newsroom, that have a business focus, but aren't necessarily dictating to the newsroom what they should be doing. And it should be a conversation and a collaboration, and not necessarily, sometimes I see a lot of this adversarial relationship where a sales guy comes in the newsroom and says, hey, I got some advertiser on the hook. If we could only just give him an entire page to say whatever he wants, he's going to give us tons and tons of money. That's not what I'm talking about. But what I am talking about is this ability to sort of use data to get these two sides to have a more fruitful conversation, bring evidence to the table. We always joke in business. I said, data is, sometimes it's about the hippo, right? The highest paid person in the room. And you want to avoid those conversations. What you really want to do is use data as an arbiter and to really have fruitful dialogue about what's happening and how you can take your publication to the next level. And data is a great way to help you do that. And so what we've done is, this is our process for essentially creating content marketing. And you'll see there's a lot of marketing here, but there's a lot of journalism in here as well. So basically, we're creating media as magnetic content studios on behalf of the brand. And then what we're doing is we're leveraging agencies and media companies to give us the skills to be able to create that media. So when we plan it out, we're using writers, we're using photographers, we're using editors. We might actually be using some of these companies over here that give us access to writers, especially if we're just trying to just do like maybe on a piece-by-piece basis, whatever that might be. We're distributing it. We're getting data and feedback on that as it gets closer to the audience. So we're using all this information, the analytics to understand what the audience wants, the distribution channels to understand where they're finding it, the content creators to help create more of what they like. We're using content management platforms. So the idea is that we're taking your processes, we're using them, and we're succeeding. The magnetic content marketing piece of our business is doing very, very well, and we have a lot of active conversations with brands as a result of this, because they have money to spend and they're willing to engage in these types of projects. And so just, again, kind of giving you something to think about while we're taking from you, make sure that you're taking from us. So just to kind of recap what I was talking about, make sure you're thinking about insights and not just the story. Make sure that you're putting data in the hands of decision makers. In this case, these are your editors. Inform them and get to those insights quickly. These don't have to be huge projects. And then find ways to integrate marketing skills into the newsroom. I'm not saying become a marketer. Don't do what I did. But please find ways to have fruitful conversations with those folks. And so thank you for your time. I appreciate it. Thank you very much.